By the way, fatigue is the enemy of strength. When you start to train through fatigue, you stop training strength and you start training endurance and stamina, which is okay if that's what you want. If you want endurance and stamina, then yeah, you definitely want to train in that fashion where you're feeling like you're out of breath but when you're training for strength, it's strength that you're testing, not stamina. So if you want the benefits that strength training provides, the faster metabolism, the preference for muscle over body fat, the hormone balancing, all, et cetera, then train the strength, not the endurance.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima. Welcome back, my friend. Happy to have you here. And today I have a conversation with Sal Di Stefano. He is round 2 on the show. He has been on the show previously, and it's actually remained in the top 10 of all of our episodes of all time. And I wanted to really have a conversation with him around first principles of training. So if you haven't heard of Sal, he's a personal trainer. He's the co-founder of Mind Pump Media and co-host of Mind Pump, which is one of the top fitness podcasts in the space. He's also the designer of Muscular Adaptation Programming System, or MAPS, fitness products. He is dedicated to prioritizing health over appearance and aims to shift the direction of the fitness industry from aesthetic and insecurity-based to one of self-love and self-care. So you can see already why I love this guy. So in our conversation today, we started off talking about what are some of the common misconceptions around muscle growth, and we parsed this out throughout our conversation between men and women. So we talk about the difference between optimal rest, what's the optimal volume, when do we start moving into junk volume. We also talk about the importance of good technique and some of the different ways that you can manipulate technique. So through functional range of motion, through mobility, manipulating tempo. So are we slowing down the eccentric? Are we working the concentric? Isometrics, that kind of thing. We talked about what the best exercises are for women. And I asked him if he only had 10 exercises, which ones would he choose? So that's a really great part of the show. I hope you'll enjoy that. And we talked about sport-specific warm-ups, why those are superior to, a 10-minute walk or, jog or something on the treadmill. And then how do you know how you are lifting? If the weight you are lifting is heavy enough. So we get into some of those particulars. We talk about session length, the ideal session length, deload week, periodization for our workouts, how we can get lean, some of the aspects of recovery. And we talk about what happens if you are not seeing results in the gym. How can you troubleshoot those things? As I mentioned, Sal is such a great communicator. You are really going to enjoy this show. And if you are enjoying the show and you feel so inclined to leave a review or a 5-star rating on Apple iTunes, I would just be so tickled and delighted to have that. So please enjoy my conversation with Sal Di Stefano. All right, Sal Di Stefano, welcome back to the show. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me back on. I really appreciate it.
So I thought we might have a conversation today around some of the basics of muscle hypertrophy and some of the different, we'll get into the weeds a little bit, but I think that this is such a foundation for my audience, typically in perimenopause. So we have a lot of women who listen here, 30s, 40s, 50s, who've always sort of been, we grew up in the cardio part of the gym, we were on the elliptical. And so now we've gone from like cardio bunnies to, everyone's like, okay, you're going to be a muscle mommy. Like, okay, what is that? What does that even mean now? So I thought we might just start with first principles. Mm-hmm. And in terms of your experience, in terms of what you see, both what you saw in practice and what you hear from your community, what are some of the biggest mistakes that we make in training as it relates to muscle hypertrophy and growth?
Really, really good question. By the way, it was funny you said muscle mommy. We just came out with a program that we titled Muscle Mommy.
Amazing. Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, I mean, we're really on, not to veer off, but it's great to see. I've been in the fitness industry as a professional for about 25 years, and it's really good to see, it's really exciting to see the change and progression of attitudes towards strength training and even towards diet. More women than ever are really starting to grasp and see the benefits of strength training. You're getting past the old fears and myths of, if I lift weights, I'm going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger type of deal. And then the data, the data on the studies and the studies on the benefits of strength training in terms of longevity, mobility, hormone health, etc., now are starting to reflect what those of us in the space have seen for so long. So it's a really, really fun and exciting time. Okay, so biggest mistakes, easily the biggest mistakes, and I could give you a few that you see with strength training, are that people confuse using resistance for strength training. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is essentially is just because you're using a dumbbell or a machine or you're doing a strength training exercise does not mean you're doing strength training. What really makes strength training, there's a few components. One of them is resistance. So you're using a weight or your body or some type of resistance that you're pushing or pulling against. But the second part is the rest periods. The rest periods are what makes strength training. So if you use dumbbells and you do so in a way to where you're going from exercise to exercise to exercise to exercise without any rest in between sets, you're no longer doing strength training. You're just doing cardio with weights. The rest period is such an important part of what makes strength training actually what it is, that if you take that out, you've lost all of those benefits. I mean, you'll still get endurance and stamina, and you'll get the benefits that you might get from cardio, but you won't build strength, you won't build muscle, you won't get the metabolism boosting effects, you won't get all those incredible benefits that we discussed in our first interview. And again, not to go into the weeds, but it's the energy system that you train that determines the adaptation that you get from the activity. So to put it in layman's terms, the energy system I'm training is one that burns quickly, that produces strength and power, and I have to rest to replenish it so that I can train that strength, that energy system again. So it's based off of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. If I go past that, I start to burn glycogen. It starts to become more of a aerobic type of activity. And the reason why I'm saying that is because a lot of people think the rest periods are there so that I can take a break and catch my breath. That's not why you take the rest period. You take the rest period so that you rebuild this energy system, which takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes, sometimes 3 or 4 minutes, so that I could train it again and tell my body to build strength. And I say that because a lot of people will strength train and then they'll pause and be like, okay, I'm ready to go again. And it's like, no, you want to rest long enough so that you could exert maximal strength and effort in your next set. And that typically, like I said, takes between 1 to 3, maybe even 4 minutes for people. So that's one big mistake, is not taking the rest periods, because people don't understand why they're there in the first place. The second mistake is doing too much. That's got to be easily, I would say, probably number one mistake. You don't need a lot of strength training to elicit the adaptation response that you're looking for in terms of adaptation, muscle building, strength. You just don't need a lot, especially if you're not somebody that's been doing this for a long time. In fact, the data on this is remarkable. They've taken people with no exercise history whatsoever, had them do 1 isometric contraction a day. So like squeezing your hands really hard, or like sitting in a squat position for like 30 to 60 seconds once a day. And you see these incredible strength gains over a 6-week period. It doesn't take much to send that signal, especially if you're not doing anything now. And most of us, or most people, confuse what they can tolerate with what would be ideal. Okay, so if you were to look at the spectrum of, exercise and how it affects my body, there's an ideal amount, and that would encompass things like intensity, frequency, how many exercises I do, et cetera, et cetera. That would be ideal. In other words, this is going to give me the best possible results. It's the perfect balance of stress, repair, and adaptation, okay? And then there's what I can tolerate, which is over here, which is I can do more and my body can handle more. But what I've done now is I've actually moved away from what's ideal, and I'm actually reducing the amount of progress or the results that I can get. And then beyond what I can tolerate, now you get into overtraining. So there's ideal, what I can tolerate, and then overtraining. Overtraining is, your body breaks down, you feel fatigued, hormones start getting out of whack, you're not only not progressing in the gym, but you're actually regressing. But a lot of us stay in that what I can tolerate space. It's like, wow, I'm getting good results. I feel good. I think I could do more. Thinking will get better results. And you can do more, but you don't get better results. You actually start to take away from your progress. So you don't really need much. So the follow-up question people have is, well, how much should I do? Well, a lot of that depends on the individual, their current fitness level, their lifestyle, sleep, stress, recovery ability, etc. But I would say that the average person could get significant results from strength training with about 2 days a week, maybe 45 minutes, and that would give them great results for years. Because there's a lot you can do in that 45-minute period where you can add more intensity, more load, you could change the tempo, you can go from easier to more challenging exercises. Most people would get all they would ever want or need long-term with 3 days a week of strength training. Very, very few of us would get any benefit from any more than that. And that's when you're talking about people who are training at the upper limits, people who are athletes, bodybuilders, who really like to push the limits. But most people would be more than happy with 2 or 3 days a week of strength training. And when I trained clients for 2.5 decades, rarely did I ever have anybody do more than 2 days a week of strength training. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean you're inactive on the other days. You should still walk and move. You could still do things like mobility. You could still do other activities. They're all very good for you so long as they're appropriate. But when it comes to strength training, and this is one of the features and one of the beauties of strength training, why I like it so much, is this much gives you this much in terms of results. It's really like an incredible investment when it comes to making money. Like I could go work more hours, or I have this investment vehicle where I could put some money in, leave it alone, and it just grows for me. That's what's amazing. And then one more thing I'll add, and you tell me if I'm rambling too long, but one more thing I'll add is the amount of strength training that is required to maintain the strength and muscle that you've built is remarkably lower than what I just said. It's actually, and the data now that's coming out on this is confirming what a lot of us have experienced. Those of us who've been working out for years and years have experienced. The data shows something like 1/5 to 1/9 of the training volume that it took to get you where you're at would be required to maintain. Again, there's benefits to being active most days, so I'm not saying don't be active. But in terms of muscle building, strength, the metabolism effects, all those other things, like if you trained for, let's say, 4 years and you did it appropriately, 2-3 days a week, like I said, and you got great results and you're strong and you feel good, and then you started going to once a week, you would keep your muscle, you would keep your strength. You wouldn't lose any of it. And that's based on some really, really good data. In fact, I just heard Dr. Andy Galpin recently, who's one of my favorite researchers to refer to on this subject. And the data is showing to prevent muscle loss. So forget about getting stronger and building muscle. But let's say you're like, hey, I just want to not lose any as I age. It's something like one strength training workout every 2 weeks would be enough.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's fascinating.
That's just how, wow. that's how remarkably, that's how remarkable this adaptation is in the body. Now, we're not talking about endurance and stamina. Those go away pretty quickly. You build a certain amount of endurance. You don't, if you don't work out for a week or two, you'll see a decrease. We're not talking about mobility. We're not talking about the health benefits of just moving. Again, I want to be very clear, but just from the specific adaptations that you're getting from strength training, the muscle and the strength, you don't need a lot. It's pretty amazing. And again, that makes it this wonderful form of exercise for the average person, because the average person has a tough time, being super consistent day in and day out. It's like, okay, well, what form of exercise should I do? Because I know that I find it challenging to be really consistent. Well, strength training. That's the way you should work out.
Yeah. Amen. I have a couple questions about what you just said. So I've just been making notes as you've been talking. For rest periods, do you notice that there's a difference between men and women? So we know that men and women have different, percentages, let's say, of type 1 and type 2 fibers. I often find that women are, maybe they're, you mentioned like 1 to 3 minutes.
Yeah.
When I'm trying to determine, and this is particularly true for me for leg day and maybe for back day as well. When I'm trying to determine what my rest period needs to be, there's going to be obviously some auto-regulate, like how was my sleep last night? How, what was my pre-fuel? All those kinds of things are going to go into that, but also what's my heart rate? what's my accessory, particularly my back muscles with squats? Like, is my back okay? Because, my quads might be ready to go, but maybe some of the smaller muscles are not quite there yet. Do you notice differences between men and women in terms of their affinity to getting back to the next set quicker? And when you're trying to determine how long an appropriate rest set is for you, this is a two-part question. What are some of the factors that you think about when you're trying to determine, okay, am I ready for the next one, or do I need like 30 more seconds, 45 more seconds, et cetera?
Yeah. I love this question. And the reason why I love this question is because I could tell you what the data says, but then I can also tell you what...
Well, there's a marrying of evidence and clinical, clinical experience.
Because there's a lot of things to consider that you don't consider in studies. So as a trainer, when I would try to parse out men and women, it always boiled down to the individual. So I'm always very careful when I communicate, men do this, women do this, because when it comes down to you, I could throw it all out the window. So it doesn't matter. I'll tell your people right now who are watching, it doesn't matter if I say, well, the data shows that women tend to handle more volume in these areas and men can do whatever. It's you got to base it off of how you feel and how your body feels. And also base it off of other lifestyle factors. How much time do I have in the gym? I might need to get out of here in a certain period of time. So I might not have the ideal rest period, but I still am going to get some of the effects, the benefits, because I have 15 less minutes than I typically do because I got out of the house late or whatever. So I would say this is how you should base your rest periods generally, because there are also variances where we could go off of this, but generally speaking, you want to rest long enough until you feel like you could put a really good effort into the next set. What you don't want to do is make your rest period so short that the next set, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to really, my performance is going to be significantly reduced with the second set or the third set. You should rest long enough till we feel like I'm ready to do like what I did with the first set, or at least close to what I did with the first set. Now, what determines how long that is? Well, the exercise makes a big difference. Barbell squats and deadlifts, you're probably going to have to rest longer than you will when you're doing a lateral or a curl or something like that, right? Your own, what happened with your sleep the previous night, your nutrition. If you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to be able to handle significantly less volume. You're probably going to have to rest more versus when you're well fed. So I like to tell people to base it off of the things that I said, because that changes as your lifestyle changes and as factors change. Because if I give a hard number like 2 minutes,
right,
well, that might be right, that might be not right. It really does depend.
Within the same woman
Correct.
Or man, right? The 2 minutes might be good this week and next week it's not. Yes.
I will say this, you can't rest too long. You cannot rest too long. In fact, there's data that shows that there's some really, one of my favorite place to look for strength training studies are Soviet era studies on Olympic weightlifting. So the Olympic weightlifting has been something that countries have competed, against each other for a long time, especially during the Cold War. The Soviet Union wanted to display their superiority or whatever. So they invested a lot of time and money and energy in their sports, especially Olympic weightlifting. And you have Olympic weightlifters that would work out all day. Now, that didn't mean they were working out all day. What it meant is they would do a lift and then they'd chill for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and they do another one. And they chill and they do another one. And then they go take lunch and they come back and complete another set. So you really can't rest too long. Now, of course, you have, limiting factors like I only have an hour to be in the gym. I only have this much time, I can only do these things. But I've literally experimented with this myself, where I've done all day workouts. And what I'll do is I'll take my typical workout, and instead of doing all of it in an hour, I'll break it up over a 6 or 7 session period, and I'll do some, and then I'll wait 45 minutes, do another bit, wait 45 minutes. Nobody has the time to do this except for a fitness fanatic like myself, where I'll take a weekend and do this. And I'll tell you, the results I get with that are remarkable, to say the least. So in other words, you can't rest too long, okay? But you can definitely rest too little. Now, how do I determine my rest? It's mostly determined by the time frame that I have to work out. I mean, I have 4 kids, I have a business. If I get to the gym, at 7 a.m., I'm going to have an hour. If something happened with the kids or the morning was a mess and I get there at 7:30, I got 30 minutes. So that determines my rest periods more than almost anything else. And then, of course, how I feel. But typically how I feel it has more influence on the amount of weight that I use, the exercises that I do, and maybe the total volume. But yeah, I would say base it off that, like, okay, do I feel like I could put the same effort I did with that first set or that second set with this next one? I think I'm ready, then go. And that could be a minute, it could be 3 minutes.
Yeah, I remember I probably started off my, earlier in my, resistance training or weightlifting career, making it more cardio, right? So like not weighting enough. And then I started, Instagram, I started, picking up my phone in between sets, and and I used to feel really guilty about it until I read, I think Menno, what is his last name? Hesselman?
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
his last name. Yeah. So he had posted something about like the 3-minute, set. And I was like, oh, thank God. So now I feel good about like responding to an email or, responding to something on Instagram for a minute or two and then kind of getting back at it.
Well, let me comment on that. All of us, but especially women, because we're all marketed to a particular way. And so we get these ideas of what a workout's supposed to feel like or what makes an effective workout. And a lot of people, especially women, believe that for a workout to be effective, you have to be out of breath, drenched in sweat, and and feeling like you're dying.
Yeah.
Like that's what, and if I'm not doing that, then there really is no benefit to the workout. And so rest periods feel like a waste of time. So, I would have clients where, I'd have them rest and, 15 seconds, I'm ready to go again. All right, let's go. Or what can I do while I'm resting? I used to get that all the time. What can I do when I'm resting?
Yeah. Can I
Nothing.
do some burpees in between
No, you do nothing. So I actually got really good. I'll tell you what, this is a little reflection. The skills that I have on the podcast for communication, a lot of it was built in me trying to entertain my clients in between sets so that they didn't try and jump on the machine or do the next exercise. But it's very different. So nothing reflects this more than the way people do plyometrics in the gym. So plyometrics, for people who aren't familiar, is like when people are jumping up on a box or, explosive type movements. They usually involve either throwing or jumping or something like that. This is a performance-based form of exercise that is, the purpose is to improve your explosive power, okay? So when you see people doing this in gyms, nobody does this right. People jump on boxes like it's cardio, like let's see how tired I could get. Or they'll throw a medicine ball until they're ready to throw up. When you watch real track and field athletes do this, they'll jump as hard as they can, and then they'll wait. Fatigue is the enemy. By the way, fatigue is the enemy of strength. When you start to train through fatigue, you stop training strength and you start training endurance and stamina, which is okay if that's what you want. If you want endurance and stamina, then yeah, you definitely want to train in that fashion where you're feeling like you're out of breath but when you're training for strength, it's strength that you're testing, not stamina. So if you want the benefits that strength training provides, the faster metabolism, the preference for muscle over body fat, the hormone balancing, all, et cetera, then train the strength, not the endurance. So when you ask yourself, what am I testing in the gym right now? Oh, I'm testing my endurance. Well, that's not what I want. I need to test my strength. That's what I'm looking for. So that's what you test is what you end up building, or that's the adaptation that you're asking from your body.
Yeah, so well said. I think when I'm training in the gym, I see, speaking of technique, I obviously hold my tongue, but there's so much evidence of poor technique.
Yeah.
And it does seem to be almost like a virus. It just spreads. So there's guys that are, they have all the plates, all the 45s on the leg press, and they're doing 5 degrees of knee flexion on the leg thing. Or, they're like heaving their bodies to get, the 40s on the bicep curls. Like just drop the ego, strip the bar a little bit. So I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about full range of motion, and we can talk about different types of ranges, like stretching, long length partials, isometrics. But first, just to double click a little bit on good technique. How do we determine, let's say with a squat, for example, how do we determine that we are moving in a biomechanically efficient way that is targeting or specifying the muscle that we are trying to activate?
Yeah. So I might have told this story on the last interview, but I repeat this one often because I had an epiphany years ago as a trainer, and it really helped me communicate what I'm about to get to. So years ago, I was on a hike. There's some foothills up here in Northern California, really nice areas to hike. And I was hiking, and every once so often a runner would pass by. And I'm a trainer, so I tend to look at biomechanics. Okay, it just happens. So I'd see someone run by and be like, "Oh my God, their feet are pronating. Ooh, that's a strong anterior pelvic tilt. Oh no, that person's okay."
Same. I'm a chiropractor. I'm like, oh, pelvic tilt.
Yeah, and I just see that, and I'm like, "Oh my God, that person's gonna hurt if they whatever." And then somebody ran by with they ran like a gazelle. It was beautiful technique that just ran by. And then I thought, and a lot of people don't know this, there's two skills, physical skills, that humans evolved to do very, very well. One of them is to throw with accuracy. We can throw with incredible accuracy. A 5-year-old could throw with better accuracy than any other primate. And then the other is running. Believe it or not, now it doesn't. You wouldn't know that now because we stopped running when we're 10. But the truth is, when it comes to like distance, just traveling for distance, trekking, humans can outlast almost any animal. This is how we hunted as hunter-gatherers. We would, throw a spear at an animal, and then we'd chase it for miles and miles and miles until it got fatigued. So we're actually built to run, but you wouldn't know this. So this person runs by with this beautiful technique. I said, why do we all run so bad? We evolved. And I said, oh, I know why. Nobody views running like a skill. People, hit 30 or whatever, and they say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go work out. They put on the running shoes, and then they don't go relearn the skill of running. They just go and run until they're tired. This is how we view all exercise. You go to the gym, you do strength training. You're not looking at a skill. You're not looking at the squat as a skill, or the press as a skill, or a row as a skill, or whatever. We're looking at it like quads, shoulders, back, chest. So you just go do the exercise until you feel that muscle burn or get sore, and then mission accomplished. Strength training is a skill. And what happens is that you take an exercise like a squat. Okay, you said the squat, right? You take an exercise like the squat. On one end, you have high risk of injury, low potential for results and success. And on the other end, you have extremely low risk of injury, very high potential for results and success. And what determines where you are on that scale is this how well you can perform the skill of squatting. Like, how good are you at squatting with good biomechanics, good stability, good balance? How well are you performing the skill? Okay, so what do you do with this information? Don't go to the gym and say to yourself, today is, butt and leg day. I'm going to go hammer my butt and legs, or today's back day. Go to the gym, look at your exercise and say, I'm going to go to the gym and get really good at perfecting the skill of these exercises. Today I'm supposed to squat. I'm supposed to bench press. I'm supposed to row. I'm going to go practice those lifts, and I'm going to do them, and I'm going to keep practicing them so I get really good at mastering those exercises. That will give you so much better results, especially in the long term, than going to the gym and just viewing exercises as a means to an end to hit a target area. The skill is so important that, like I said, you could take I can make any exercise extremely dangerous. I can also take any exercise done properly with good stability, good balance, good control is perfectly safe. Pick the most crazy looking, dangerous exercise that exists. If a person can perform it with good strength, stability, control, they're not going to hurt themselves. Pick the easiest exercise in the world. Have somebody do it without those things. You are probably going to hurt yourself. And take injury out of there. Like, you want your body to really develop and progress, then master the skill of it. So think of it like this. Like, if you wanted to get better at basketball, which we all view as a skill, imagine if you went on the court, you never played basketball before, and you just ran and threw the ball as fast and hard as you could so you could get tired. Like, you would never get good at basketball. You would never get good at the skill of it. So get good at the skill of strength training, and you'll get way better results. All right, so what does that mean? Well, thankfully we have the internet now, so you can pull up videos and tutorials on exercise technique and form, and try to get as good as you can copying that. And if you can't, scale back and make the exercise easier and slowly work yourself to a point where you're performing the exercise the way you're supposed to. So if it's a squat, for example, which is a very technical, it's a natural movement. We're all designed to squat.
I'm so happy you're saying this because I had to. Okay, keep going. Yes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. So
it's very technical.
Yes.
Yeah.
So squatting is a natural human movement. We're supposed to be able to squat. We lose the ability to squat because we stop squatting, at a very young age. I mean, if you go to countries where they don't even have chairs, like you go to Okinawa, some of the traditional homes, they still sit on mats and on the floor and stuff. And people into their 80s and 90s are getting up and off the ground and squatting. So we're made to, squatting is a natural movement, but we lose the skill. That's my point. We're not able to. So you're getting into squatting. It's highly technical. If you haven't squatted for a while, especially if you haven't squatted with resistance, so you go and you try to do it, and you're just like, your heels come up, your knees are going in, you feel tight in your back, something doesn't feel right. All right, take the weight off the bar or go no weight. Now try it. Ooh, that still bothers me here. Okay, don't squat so deep. Make it shorter. Go down as far as you can until you feel like things starts to break down. And then what you do is you slowly, over time, get to the point where you can go a little lower, a little lower, a little lower, a little lower. And then, of course, it might be more complicated. Okay, I need to work on mobility on my ankle. I need to strengthen my core, whatever. But slowly work so you can get that technique. And then you start to add load. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit of weight. And then, by the way, this entire time, you're building muscle and strength. This entire time, your body's developing. It's not like you have to squat perfectly to get your body to progress. This entire process of learning the skill is strength training. It's just you have to approach it that way if you want to do this in a very effective and simultaneously safe way.
Yeah. I'm so happy you're saying this because I've had to relearn how to squat. So I would always ego lifting. I'd always be putting more weight. And then I would get to a certain number and just like clockwork, I twinge the knee and then I'd have to peel it all back and start again. And I think that it is, for a lot of women, at least that I survey, they'll say, oh, I only feel squats in my quads. I never feel them in my glutes. And it's like, okay, so we have to work on some ankle mobility, some activation through the foot, how you're pressing up, how deep are you going in the hole, all the things that you were just saying. And if I can add, and I'd love your thinking on this, this is where I've introduced tempo into my training more so in recent years, where the slower that I can move, and this just might be me, but the slower that I can move on the eccentric, the more I can feel the muscles that I want to feel. Yeah. And then, of course, it's going to reduce the injury risk. And I'm not bouncing around and using momentum to kind of get back up. What are your thoughts on tempo? What do you like using tempo personally in your program prescriptions? What are you thinking? What do you think about eccentric control?
Oh, one of my favorite variables to manipulate. But look, the faster you move, the more skill and mastery you need to have of an exercise. So you take a movement that you could do well slowly and you do it quickly, you have to be really, really good at mastering the exercise before you can move quickly. So explosive movements, you don't want to do anything explosive or fast unless you really got the movement, because it just raises the risk of injury. But generally speaking, you want a tempo where the negative portion of the rep is taking about 4 seconds. There's maybe a 1 second pause at the bottom, and then about 2 or 3 seconds on the way up. That's a nice general tempo, but you could go slower or faster. They all seem to provide benefit, and there also seems to be a novelty effect where if you always train with one particular tempo, moving outside of that seems to get the body to start to respond again. But as a trainer, as a coach, slower tempos are what I worked with all the time, because you just have more control. We're going to perfect the exercise better. We're going to do it better. And I'm able to adjust the rep easier as we're going through it versus when you're going fast. When you're going fast, then it gets, very challenging. If you're off a little bit, well, how do I correct you, mid rep? But, you mentioned something interesting about feeling a muscle. The more experience you get, the more important this actually becomes. In the very beginning, how the muscle feels, and I'm going to be very careful with how I say this. It can sometimes be misleading. I'll give you an example. Okay. So I'll get a brand new client who's never strength trained before, and then I'll have them do a tricep press down with a rope, right? Where they push the weight down, and they'll feel it in their core. Oh, I feel that in my abs. Okay. So that's not a core exercise, but they feel it in the core because they're having to stabilize their body while do the
Right.
exercise. And because they're so deconditioned, they're going to feel it in all these different ways. So when it comes to people in their first year, I would say, of strength training, it's more important to master the skill of the exercise than it is to try to feel what muscles you're trying to target. Now, as you get more advanced, then like yourself, well, now you can get in and you could probably make a squat glute or quad, right? You can make a bench press delt or pec or tricep just by, what muscles you're trying to work. But in the beginning, it's like, I'm looking at your form and technique, and what I'm looking for is, does this hurt? Do we have pain? Do you feel unstable? Are you feeling this too much in areas that you shouldn't? Like, my low back or something like that. But I'm really trying to just perfect form and technique. And then if I am trying to get someone to feel a muscle, it's typically either for correctional exercise purposes. So you may have somebody who, they might have a muscle that might be so disengaged just because of movement patterns that they almost can't even activate it. Like an easy example would be, someone can't activate their rhomboids or mid-trapezius to pull their shoulder blades, back and down. You ask them to do this and they end up doing this, right? And so getting them to feel those muscles can sometimes be important for correctional exercise. And the way I'll do that is I'll give them, feedback from the outside. So I'll touch the muscle that helps you. Oh, okay, I see where I need to feel it. And then, or do an isolation exercise before you move to the compound lift, just so you know what you're trying to feel. So like, again, using the squat as an example, I've been doing squats for a year. I feel like I'm good at them. I never feel them on my butt. I want to develop my butt. Then what I might have you do is 1 or 2 sets of hip thrusts with light weight where you squeeze the glutes at the top. So you've got that connection. Okay, I can feel my glutes now. All right, now let's do the squat and try and see if you can get that feeling with the squat. And then people do these micro adjustments with their technique because they've got that feedback, and then they can hit the glutes a little bit more with the squat. But that's as we start to progress. But in the beginning, it's like technique. Technique is everything. And I'm looking for, does this feel wrong? Does it feel unstable? Do you feel pain?
Yeah. And I to your point earlier around the motor learning, that is the goal. So let's say you have someone with an arthrotide, some osteoarthritis or rheumatoid or something that's destroying the joint. Like your goal is not necessarily to put all the weight on the bar or whatever on the machine. It's really just to, as you were saying, to learn the movement pattern properly, and if possible, work towards a full range of motion. So if you can move the joint, move the muscle through that full ROM first, then you can start to play with some of the things that we're talking about. So like the long length partials and isometric hold and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, full range of motion is extremely important, but I will add this caveat here. Only move in the range of motion that you feel you own. And then from there, try to increase the range of motion incrementally over time. The reason why I say that is sometimes people will hear that. I've actually had it happen on the podcast. Somebody will write in and be like, I did, butt to the ground squats, like you said, and I hurt my back. I'm like, oh, I gotta make sure I communicate this right. Like, don't go past a range of motion you don't feel like you own because you think, oh, the range of motion is superior, because then what ends up happening is you end up hurting yourself. Now, that being said, the range of motion that you train is where a majority of the strength you gain is going to be applied. There's some carryover outside of it, but it's mostly in that range of motion. So if you train in a short range of motion and you get really strong in that short range of motion, the discrepancy between the range of motion that you train and that you're strong in and the range of motion you don't train in that hasn't caught up starts to become so large, you actually increase your risk of injury. So this is why you'll have like a bodybuilder who's obviously got lots of muscle and strength. They'll go to the park and throw a Frisbee and they'll throw their shoulder out. It's like, what happened? Well, they have all these big prime movers and they're really strong in these specific movements, but their stabilizers can't support all the strength and they don't train outside a particular range of motion. In fact, the myth of being muscle bound or that strength training makes you tight comes from that subcategory or population of individuals. Like if you always train in a particular range of motion where particular exercises, you never move laterally, you never train your body with rotation or whatever, what ends up happening is your body, because you're building all this muscle and strength, and this might not apply to most people watching, but just so people, if they witness this, strength training doesn't make you tight. Strength training done properly is the most effective way to build what's called functional flexibility. Like nothing builds functional flexibility like strength training, meaning if you did static stretching, you would gain a larger range of motion, but you wouldn't build strength in that larger range of motion. So you would actually become potentially more unstable. In fact, and I'm sure you could speak to this as a chiropractor, the most unstable people in the world are hypermobile people who are weak.
Yep.
Like that's injury all over the place. So strength training builds strength in the ranges of motion. It gives you what's called functional flexibility. So I can move in this range of motion, but I also have strength in it so I don't hurt myself. But what ends up happening when you train in specific exercises, you're only focused on building muscle, you're only focused on looking good, is your body, as you start to build strength, starts to protect itself more and more because you're really strong moving this way, but you're not as strong moving this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to limit your movement. And so then you look like you're muscle bound. So you see those people that, quote unquote meatheads that like, why do they look so stiff? Well, it's because their body's literally like trying to protect them, because if they move outside of what they're strong in, there's a high risk of injury. But for the average person listening, if you train properly and you utilize a variety of movements and you don't neglect anything and you work through full range of motion and don't compromise that, you'll have very fluid, balanced movement, a great range of functional flexibility. That's really what it can provide if done right.
This is what I also find too, coming back to back day, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but in that stretch position, so to make sure, if I'm doing like a row or something, so in that elongated position, so I'm making sure that the muscles are also elongating, but also like the capsule, like I'm getting some like elongation of the capsule. Let's say if it's a row, I'm stretching out, like let's say the shoulder capsule as well before I start to pull back. What is it do we understand about the stretch position that does seem to elicit some of these hypertrophy or muscle growth gains? Do we know?
Yeah, so the data shows that if you were to look through here's what the data shows, and then here's why I'm careful to communicate through the data alone. So the data shows that if we were to look at a full range of motion, you have the contracted portion. So like this would be contracted portion for a curl. And then we have the mid-range, which might be here. And then the stretch position would be like all the way down here, right? If you were to look at all of them, the stretch position elicits the most muscle growth or hypertrophy. But see, that doesn't tell the whole story, because all of those ranges of motion elicit hypertrophy, not just the stretch position. They all do. And the stretch position, although it does provide the strongest signal for hypertrophy, it also tends to cause the most stress and damage on the muscle itself, which means you're also limited to the amount of volume and frequency you can do with that stretch position. Yeah. So there's value and benefits to all of them, right? But like the full contracted position, it's the least amount of damage, the smallest muscle building signal, but also the smallest amount of damage. So I could do a lot of that. I could do a lot of squeezing throughout the day and get like nice, cumulative benefits. So it doesn't really tell the whole story when you just look at the data and go, oh, this builds them, so I'm just going to focus on that. It's like, no, you're missing out on all this other stuff. And then using them all is where you're going to get the best benefit. And of course, that's where you're going to own those ranges of motion. Because if I just train in that stretch, then I'm going to be weaker than I should be in those other areas. So it's important to kind of look at the whole picture. Isometrics, for example, very in comparison to like eccentric loading or concentric loading, isometrics produce the smallest muscle gain. But I can also do isometrics the most because they cause the least amount of damage. And you know what isometrics are really good for? They're great for body parts I have trouble connecting to.
Right.
So, so like to use your example of the row, if I'm working with a client that has trouble, activating the mid back, which is like most people who don't work out, who work on computers, then I'm going to do a row, but I'm going to have them hold their shoulder blades back here at first, because I got to strengthen that isometric pull back position. Then as we develop more strength, then I can start to move outside. Because if I take that same person and have them do this, it's not going to happen. Like they can't even hold back here, let alone get the full range of motion. So typically you'll see me with my hands on someone's shoulders, pulling them back, and then I'll have them do a row, and then I'll let go, try and hold that position, because I'm trying to get them to connect to that position. So there's a lot more to the story is what I'm trying to say. But for the person listening right now, full range of motion is where it's at. It's where you're going to get all of it.
Yeah. And that's sort of the difference between how often can you squat versus how often can you hip thrust, right? So, you mentioned
Bingo.
before, like squatting is,
Yes.
there's only so many squats, and if you have a trainer who's only giving you squats and deads, and you're sore for days,
Yep.
like maybe there's some, maybe there's some opportunity there for exploring different ranges of motion. Like hip thrust, you can do, maybe you shouldn't do it every day, but you could because you're not really sore from them. But squats, I can't do.
No.
I train. You can't train them that often.
No. I'm so glad you went there. So when you look at exercises, there's, I don't know if I wish you could. This would be tough to do though because there's so many variances. But exercises have a damage potential. They have a stimulate muscle growth and strength potential. There's a skill level requirement for all of them, and they're all over the place. Some exercises don't cause nearly as much damage as others. Some exercises are better for this type of performance versus this one. Some build more muscle, but then others are more recuperative, which if that's what you need, well, then that might actually build more muscle for you than not. I've more often than not, especially with fitness fanatics who I've worked with, more often than not, a reduction in their training volume produces better results than increasing or adding things. More often than not, I look at their program and I go, way too much. Take this out, take this out, take this out. And they come back and they're like, wow, my strength is going through the roof. My body's progressing again. That's more often than not the case with the fitness fanatic.
Yeah, that's as you're saying. I'm like, yeah, he's just totally describing me. I'm in that. You were talking about the what is ideal versus what you can tolerate. I am definitely in the tolerate.
Same here. Look, I tell you what, I struggle with this all the time. But I'll tell you this: when you go on vacation and you don't work out, you probably come back stronger.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah,
it's so true.
Yeah.
And you can have a couple days, and it's funny because just recently I was just struggling in the gym. It was like 2 consecutive leg days, and I was like, what the hell? I'm not getting the same, weights. I'm not getting the same reps, same volume. Yeah. And I kind of looked back into my kind of training and I was like, oh no, I haven't done any type of deload. I haven't done any type of recuperative or recovery week. And I usually naturally build them in just sort of when I'm feeling. It's usually around my cycle, but it can be like, there's, you can do it a million different ways how you might think about recovery or deloading. And it was maybe 20 weeks or something, 18, 20 weeks. And I had just been going and I had accumulated so much fatigue that my body now was more concerned about recovering. So I took a half week off and everything was just like took 3-4 days off, went back to the gym and felt like a new person. It was incredible.
It's really challenging for those of us that love the process so much and love being in the gym. And I struggle with this all the time, doing too much. I know I could get better results if I did less. So I'd be lying if I said I didn't struggle with this. Now, most people struggle with just getting to the gym.
Getting enough.
Yeah, with just getting in there. But yeah, doing more than you need doesn't get you better results. It starts to take away from your progress and your health. You look at extreme performance, for example, you have performance, you have longevity. And once you start to train, the more you start to train for performance, the more you start to move away from longevity. So when you look at like high level athletes, these are not the healthiest people in the world. We think they are, like, oh my God, look at that crazy performance, but no, they're not. They've sacrificed longevity for maximum performance. So like the top runners, the top strength athletes, the top whatever, they're not optimally healthy because they're training for this maximum type performance. And that's a good thing to know. And I it's important even to communicate to the average person, because I often hear this from people: I should be able to do more. I should be able to handle more of my workouts. Like, because we have people that call in on the show all the time and they'll tell us, what their workouts look like and what's going on. And a lot of times, like, you're doing too much. They'll be like, but I should be able to do more. And it's like, yeah, no, like, you have kids. Yeah, you're not sleeping very well. Like, you don't get a lot of sunlight. It's too much stress on the body. So let's bring it down and let's see what happens. They all come back and they go, oh my God. I was going to say this earlier too. I don't want to forget. Strength training is, and I like to say this because it sells it. Okay, so I'll be very honest. I'm about to sell strength training, but I'm not going to lie. This what I'm about to say is the truth. Strength training is pro tissue. It's a proactive tissue form of exercise. Other forms of exercise aren't necessarily like this. What I mean by that is strength training directly tells the body to engage or encourage what's called protein synthesis. Okay. So protein synthesis is the act of building muscle. But you know what else is protein synthesis? Your skin, your hair, your nails. There's actually data to show now that the form of exercise that improves your skin more than any other form of exercise is strength training. In fact, other forms of exercise might actually degrade your skin. If you're doing a form of exercise that's telling your body to lose muscle, which there are forms of exercise, like excessive cardio will do that your body's reduction in protein synthesis will also happen in your skin and your hair. So they actually did this with a really interesting study. So you want better skin, strength train.
Oh, I want to look up that study. That's awesome. So basically, like anything that's anabolic, right?
Yes.
So we think about, resistance training. I would also maybe categorize like high intensity interval training as anabolic as well. Those are going to be pro tissue, and like the long intensity steady state, the 2 hours every day, Orange Theory, F45, not to throw any company or anything under the bus, but when you're only doing cardio all the time, I hear this from women a lot. It's like, I don't understand. I'm working out 5 days a week. I'm at Orange Theory or whatever it is, 5 days a week, and I'm doing, HIIT training 5 days a week. It's like, well, that's too much. There is also that you can overdo a good thing as well, as we've been talking.
I'm going to give you an analogy to help that person right now. Okay. So let's just look at let's use finances as a good analogy for what we're about to talk about. So you have a job, it's steady, you have a savings account, it's okay. An economy goes down and you lose your job and inflation goes up. What you typically would do is reduce your spending like crazy, and you would try to save more money because you're like, oh, this is kind of scary. Okay. That's what the body does with too much stress from exercise. So how does it spend less money? Well, it reduces its caloric output by reducing or paring down the most calorically expensive tissue in the body, which is muscle. So you start to lose muscle because your body's like, we're stressed. We need to burn less calories, pare down muscle. Yeah. And then it boosts its ability to save. What is the savings account that you're walking around with during times of scary times? Body fat. So if you're working out 5 days a week, doing high intensity workouts, and you're eating very little, and you can't figure out why you can't lose 15 pounds, it's because your body is so scared of losing any body fat. It is literally doing everything it can, from your hormones to your metabolism and all the complicated pathways through the metabolism, to make you store body fat and make you lose muscle. So that's why you feel like it's impossible, because it is impossible. I'm going to tell you right now, if you fight your body, you will lose. This is not a battle you can win. If you are telling your body to do one thing and your body's like, I'm doing this over here, you will lose the battle. No way you'll win. You have to work with your body. How do you do that? How do I tell my body that it's okay to burn more calories? Well, I do that by, first I got to give it a strength signal. I need strength. And then I got to feed it. I got to feed my body appropriately. Otherwise, my body's not going to want to do any of that stuff. And I have to give my body the ability to recover and adapt. Otherwise, it's going to want to hold on to everything. So a good routine should feel like this. If you're doing everything right, this is what it should feel like. Okay. This is what should happen. This is how I knew when my clients, when we were doing everything right, they would come to me and they would say this. They'd say, all right, Sal, I don't know what is going on, but I'm getting leaner and I feel like I'm barely doing anything and I'm eating more food. I don't know what the hell's happening right now. Like, what's going on? That's what you should feel like. If you're doing everything right, you should feel like, wow, this feels good. And it's kind of like, I don't feel like I'm forcing things to happen. They just feel like they're happening. That's how you know you're doing all this stuff. That's how you know you've got the right mix of exercise, intensity, diet, sleep, the whole deal.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. And it's such a satisfying thing when a client comes back and says, I don't know, I'm eating more and I'm losing weight. Like, it's completely backwards to my entire paradigm, my whole life. I've been, I think we talked about this last time, but the hill that I will die on is 1,200 calories is not enough, girl. Oh. Like, it's just, I don't care. I mean, maybe you're 95, you're 4'9", and you maybe then it's appropriate, or maybe you're cutting for a show or something in the extreme, like you're, bikini or figure or wellness or something. But that's like in the last, you're not doing that all year, because even they will go back, like they have the big meal after the show and all the things. So
Here's how you know how you know that
yeah.
that's a baloney number, by the way, because that's the number that you'll get, like the official, like don't go below 1,200 calories. Here's
Yeah.
how you know. Have you ever tried to or seen them construct a 1,200 calorie diet that also meets all of our micronutrient and nutrient demands?
No.
Good luck.
No.
You have to be like a master nutritionist to piece that diet together so you're not lacking an essential nutrient. So that's your clue right there that that's too little.
Yeah, and to your point around performance and lifespan, like the bodybuilders that you see, like the physique competitors, like they are not optimizing for longevity when they get up on stage. Like they are very unhealthy at that point. We may ascribe a, oh, that looks good, or that's an ideal, or that's the physique but that is absolutely not what the human body should look like.
No,
year round.
Too much body fat is not great for you, and so is too little body fat.
Yeah.
So getting shredded, although we glorify it on social media and whatever, the truth is a healthy body fat percentage is not below a certain amount. So for women, and this could vary from individual to individual, but if you're fit and healthy, you probably want to sit somewhere between, at the low end, 17% up into the mid to high 20s. And for a man, maybe on the low end, 8% body fat, but as high as like 16, maybe 17% body fat. So it's a big range, but my point is you start to get below that number, and some women getting down to 17 and staying down to 17, for example, is too low. They'll see hormone imbalances and all kinds of other issues. And for a lot of men, being at 8% for too long, they'll see testosterone plummet and all that stuff. So there's a genetic variant there as well. But yeah, getting shredded it's not healthy. It's definitely not pro longevity, that's for sure.
Yeah. I have a kind of a fun question for you, just as we're talking about muscles. If you could, maybe I'll ask this two ways, one for men and one for women. If you could only have 10 exercises for you to do for the rest of your life, and then you had another set maybe for me and the women who are listening, what do you think that those might be?
Oh yeah, so you would definitely have a squat, you would have a deadlift, you would have some kind of a horizontal press, some kind of an overhead press, you would have some kind of a row, and then I would include a split stance exercise of some sort. It's like a lunge, a Bulgarian split stance squat, something like that. Mm-hmm. I would include some type of rotational movement. I would include some type of a lateral strength training movement, like lateral sled drags or a lateral lunge or something that moves side to side. Mm-hmm. And then, you could actually throw in a couple others that you really enjoy doing. I don't need 10. I really don't need 10 exercises. But, to be clear, when I say squat, a squatting movement, there's a lot of exercises that would fall under a squat, right? Press, there's a lot of types of presses. An overhead press, a lot of types of rows. But I basically just listed kind of the basic fundamental types of human movement, which would be push, pull, push, squat, split stance, lateral rotation. Like, if you've got those covered, then you're doing well.
And do you think that there's any difference for men or women, or would you keep them, you'd equate them agnostic of sex?
Yeah, it's generally the same, but what you typically see with women that isn't communicated enough, especially women after they've had children, are special considerations for the TVA, so transverse abdominis. It's the muscle that brings in the midsection. So if like you suck in your stomach, that's the TVA. When you have a child, that muscle necessarily stretches and atrophies to make room for baby. And you develop different recruitment patterns. So what happens as you're pregnant, especially third trimester, is your body stabilizes its core differently because of the changing shape of your body and the requirements for the baby. So you start to rely more on hip flexors and erector spinae and other muscles to stabilize. After you have the baby, those muscle recruitment patterns remain unless you start to train back those older patterns. Same thing with pelvic floor exercises. When muscles become atrophied or weakened, whether through injury or necessity, and you develop a new recruitment pattern, you have to train the other recruitment pattern, otherwise it will remain with that old one. And then what you tend to see is women will have kids and they'll be like, man, I used to be able to do these core exercises and now my back hurts or my hip hurts all the time, or I'm not able to activate, everything feels like I can't activate certain like muscles, or I have a lower belly pooch. That's an aesthetic thing. Like, what's going on? I'm doing abs and obliques like crazy. And it's your recruitment patterns change based on their demands. And a recruitment pattern is just how the muscles work together. And you learn that skill. So the example that I like to give is, I like to use this. If you always ever typed with 2 fingers, okay, this is how you type. And then I told you to type as fast as you could using your technique versus the proper technique, you would be faster doing it this way until you mastered this technique, and then eventually you'd surpass. So you have to relearn a recruitment pattern, and then it starts to get better and better. And then now you're using the recruitment pattern that's superior.
Yeah, I love that. Hypopressives are, I don't know if you probably heard of hypopressives for the TVA, or just that sucking in motion, and like holding in that sucking in motion is so wonderful for women. I'm so happy that you brought up pregnancy and some of the mechanics. It's actually wild. If you look at what happens to a woman's body, like her spine changes, all the organs move out of the way. It's absolutely wild what happens to the physiology and just the anatomical compensations in a woman when she's pregnant.
Your joints change. Your joints literally change. I think physical therapy postpartum should be 100% prescribed and essential. I think you should have postpartum, because you're not going to leave your house in those first 3 months. Anybody who has kids know what I'm talking about. You should have a physical therapist come to your house and do those pelvic floor exercises and do some physical therapy, because what ends up happening is you're left with your new learned recruitment pattern that you had from pregnancy with a non-pregnant body. And then you wonder why things don't feel the same, things hurt, like what's going on.
Yeah. How do you like to warm up? Do you like someone to jump on a treadmill for 10 minutes? Do you like them to do some of the movement pattern you mentioned before you squat, you might do some isometrics or something, or a hip thrust to sort of activate the muscles? Do you like the warm-ups to be would you call it sports specific or motor specific to what you're doing? Or do you think that general warm up, like walking on the treadmill or something just to sort of get blood circulating is, what's your preference?
Yeah, no, great. I love this question. So warming up is not because you need to get your muscles warm. I know we call it warming up and that's how you feel, but we tend to think of a muscle like it's a piece of rubber. And if it's cold, it doesn't stretch. And if it's warm, then it stretches nicely. That's not what's happening. It's the central nervous system that you're warming up. It's not the muscles. I'm trying to get my central nervous system ready to perform and exert and control muscles in a safe way while I do these exercises. So just jumping into a movement with high intensity without a warm up oftentimes means the central nervous system isn't ready. And so then I try to do the movement, I don't get the right recruitment pattern, I get the right control and stability, and I hurt myself. Okay. So that's why you have a higher risk of injury when you don't quote unquote warm up versus when you do warm up. All right. So the question is, what's the best way to warm up? Generally speaking, because this is very specific, but generally speaking, light sets of the movement you're about to do will warm you up well. And the way you want to do it is you want to do it slow and controlled, and you want to feel everything and then slowly progress from there. And that gets the central nervous system ready to go. All right. More specifically, you want to do what's called priming, and you want to identify what your recruitment pattern issues are for that specific exercise to help you. So I'll give you an example. The bench press is also a very technical exercise. It doesn't look technical, but it's a very technical exercise. And a lot of people, so to perform a bench press properly, there's a few components that are essential. But one of them is that you pull the shoulder blades back and down, and you anchor your shoulders into the bench. So you're activating your lats, your rhomboids to stabilize your shoulder girdle so that you can press. Okay. So for a lot of people, that's tough because they can't even activate that. So when they do a bench press, they'll get this forward, this shoulder rolling position, or one of the shoulders will hike. And so they start to get shoulder problems as the body's trying to stabilize that joint while you're pressing. So for a person like that, a good priming warm-up session would be some really light rows to get them to activate and feel those muscles, get the central nervous system to connect, for lack of a better term. That way, when they get under the bar, they're in that nice position. They can feel what they're supposed to, and then they can stabilize. Another example would be, someone who squats and notices that when they squat, their feet turn out or their ankles rise. So that typically has to do with ankle and foot connection or mobility. So I would have that person prime with like something called like a combat stretch or some short foot, just to get the ankle and everything kind of like to activate and to feel good and stable and strong. That way when I go into the squat, I don't do this overcompensation with my feet where they kind of turn out. So that's more on a specific basis, but generally speaking, like a few sets of the exercise you're about to perform with good, slow control movement. Now, the better you get, the less you need to really place an emphasis on warming up. Like you get somebody who's really good and really, really proficient, and it depends on the person and the exercise. But like I can jump into pull-ups and rows with my work weight almost right out the gates because I'm so good at those movements. Now squats, no, it takes me a good 15 to 20 minutes to get my body ready to do those squats properly. Deadlifts, I can almost jump into them right out the gate. So it depends on the individual, but yeah, typically a set or two of the exercises will get you what you need.
My clue, if I haven't warmed up, is that I almost feel tired when I'm in my working sets. Like my cortisol, like you said, you're working the nervous system. So if I'm in my working set and I'm like, God, I'm tired. It's like the first set. It's like, oh, I haven't actually primed my nervous system. I haven't actually jacked up the catecholamine, all the things that sort of come with warming up the nervous system. So that might be helpful for anybody who's listening. If you're sort of feeling tired in the first set, it's like the nervous system hasn't quite kicked in yet, and you're like, oh, it's so much work. Yeah. Even though it's like the first one.
Yeah, one thing to add on that, generally speaking, a bad way to warm up is static stretching. Now there are cases where static stretching is appropriate if I'm trying to get a muscle out of the way because the person can't perform an exercise because something's too tight. But generally speaking, static stretching, which is like holding a stretch for a long period of time, that tells the central nervous system to shut down or to decrease activation. You don't want that when you're strength training, because that could increase your risk of injury. So I don't want to do a static quad and hamstring stretch and then go into squats, for example, because I'll actually be able to output less power. I mean, the reason why you're able to do a static stretch and the muscle is able to get longer and longer and you're able to stretch deeper and deeper is because literally the central nervous system is relaxing its connection. So static stretching at the end of a workout is great though.
One of the questions that I get a lot, because I'm a big proponent of heavy lifting, but doing it safely, is what is heavy? How do I determine what is and you're smiling because this is probably a question that you also get as well. Training, I talk about training close to or approximating failure. So maybe an RIR, reps in reserve 1 to 3-ish, or, if you were to rate it out of 10, it's like an 8, a 9, or a 10 in terms of intensity. And I'll also just say this, I also feel like what people think is failure is not actually failure. So most people think that they're training to failure. They'll say, oh yeah, Steph told me to do, like, yeah, this is totally an 8 out of 10. Meanwhile, they might have had like 7 more reps, So what does it look like to get close to approximate failure, not necessarily get there? And how do we know that we've chosen the appropriate weight?
Yeah, great question. And I can tell you're besides the way you look, I could tell you're pretty hardcore with your strength training. All right, so all right, let's talk about failure first. There's 2 ways to approach failure. One is I can't do another rep of the exercise. That means I've failed. The other way to look at it is I can't do another perfect rep. Okay? So, and this is that's the one that I typically use for the clients or the people that I advise. It takes somebody with good skill and control and stability who's pretty advanced with strength training to be able to go to failure where you can't do another rep without their form going all. You could probably do this because you've been doing this for so long, you have a lot of experience. But for the average person, I typically don't advise them to go there because it's usually 5 crappy reps to get there. And we've just it's not beneficial. So the failure that I like to use is that the last perfect rep you could do? Perfect. Anytime you start to move outside of perfect, now we're done with the set. Okay, so that's how I like to use that, for most people. All right, what is heavy weight? The weight on the bar or how much weight you're using doesn't determine if it's heavy or not, because obviously what's light for one person would be heavy for someone else. It's the intensity. Are you able, if you have a prescribed number of reps you're trying to hit, let's say I'm trying to do 10 reps in a barbell row. Okay. Is the 10th rep, does it feel like that's the last perfect rep I could do? Then the weight is heavy. It's appropriate. If it feels like, wow, I did 10 perfect reps, but I feel like I could have done another 10, it's too light. Or I did 10 reps, but the last 2 were like not great. Okay, it's too heavy. So whatever your rep range is that you're trying to work in, does it feel like that's the most weight you could do with that perfect form? Then that's the right weight to pick.
And sometimes I feel like just resting a second, I know that this may be a little bit of a cheat, but if you're doing the barbell roll with your example, sometimes if you just take just a second rest, then you can like punch out 1 or 2 more, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's not, well, maybe you tell, is that cheating? I don't know.
No.
I find that if I can do a squat, if I'm getting close to that last perfect rep, if I just take like just a second at the top and then I can go down again and maybe I can get 1 or 2 more. Yeah,
that's the rest pause technique would be kind of the terminology that would describe what you're doing. That's an advanced strength training technique. And there's so much that goes into this. Is why I said, the average person could probably get all the results they ever wanted with 2 days a week, definitely with 3 days a week, because there's so much I could do with 2 days a week within the workout that it would take me 4 years of consistently training you before I'm like, we need to add another day of strength training. I mean, you brought one up, right? Rest pause is a great example, a great intensity increasing example that I wouldn't need to touch with someone for the first couple of years of training.
Okay. So in line with when someone is trying to design their own workouts, which by the way, I know that you and the Mind Pump group put out fantastic programs, and we'll make sure that those are linked in the show notes. So if you are completely lost, you can head over to Sal and the Mind Pump Media and all of the products that you guys put out, the Muscle Mommy one that you mentioned. When I think about female training, and I've said this before on the show, I'm thinking about glutes and I'm thinking that delts that look like glutes. I would like those. I want glutes and I want, 3D delts, right? I mean, of course, there are other things. You want a nice back and all the things. But those are like my 2 primary things that I think about. So when you're designing a program, when we're thinking about volume, with this idea that we don't want to get into that junk volume that we were talking about before, like the ideal volume versus the one you can tolerate, what is your thinking around sets per muscle group? Are you thinking about it in terms of sets per session, sets per week? How are you thinking about it when we're thinking about it in the lens of hypertrophy?
Oh man, we could talk for hours on this. It depends on the exercise, the intensity, the individual, but there is a general total volume that you want to work within, and you could take volume from some parts of the body and move them towards it. So here's one of the awesome things too about strength training is it's the only targeted shaping, targeted sculpting form of exercise. Like I could look at myself and say, I want more here, more here, more here. And I could move volume of my training, to those areas with my workouts. But I'll say this to the people watching right now, don't design your own workouts. There's a lot that goes into programming strength training. This is the downside of strength training. The only downside is the programming being exercise, sets, reps, orders of exercise, tempo, rest periods, how the workouts throughout the week match each other, how the microcycles match the mesocycles, how the mesocycles match with other, I mean, this is like, trainers with 10, 15 years of experience start to do this pretty well. That's what it takes. So it's very complex. Don't write your own workouts. Hire the best thing you could possibly do would be to hire a really good trainer, somebody with a lot of experience who's really good, who's not trying to just beat the crap out of you. They'll be able to individualize a workout. There's no workout that I could create generally that will match what a person could create for you individually. Okay. Second best would be a well-written workout program that's created by trainers or coaches with a lot of experience, not the hype, flash, urban hip hop cowboy, interval workout, whatever.
The V-shred.
Yeah, no. We have programs and we write them for different avatars. So the programming is appropriate for this type of person, this type of goal. I'll tell your audience right here, if you're just getting started into strength training, we have a program called MAPS Starter. It's the perfect program for brand new people. If you have some experience with strength training, you've been doing it for 6 months or so, and you can do basic exercises. You feel like, okay, I've been doing it consistently for a little while. The new MAPS Muscle Mommy program would be great. And what's the difference between that and other strength training programs? Well, you actually hit the nail on the head. Strength training for men and women is generally the same. The difference would be, as a trainer, men tend to want to develop these areas a little more, and women tend to want to develop these areas a little more. So what you see with MAPS Muscle Mommy is more volume is dedicated towards glutes, more emphasis is on shoulders over chest, over arms. You see pelvic floor work, you see core work. The way that the program is laid out is to address the aesthetic concerns that women tend to have. We don't neglect any part of the body. We're trainers first before we are media people. So we're not going to write a program that's going to create imbalances, but we did shift the volume in that program. And we did include nutrition advice. We did add in there xenoestrogen concerns that women tend to encounter more than men. We did put some supplements in there that women tend to benefit more from men. But so if you have some experience, that would be the program. If you have no experience, MAPS Starter. But yeah, don't just write your own workout program, please. You either hire someone or get a program that comes from a reputable source and start there, because there's a lot that goes into programming when it comes to strength training.
Yeah. Yeah, there really is. And what advice would you give for someone who is not seeing results in the gym? So maybe they've been working at it for a while, they've been listening to your show or mine or others, where they're hearing this message of, muscle has this mobility function, metabolic function, menstrual function, has that, hormonal balancing function. How important is it for someone to be, and we can maybe parse this with a conversation in diet as well, but how important is it for you to be tracking your lifts? And then like the total volume question, like, should we be watching total volume or are we looking at strength as a metric to be watching over time? Like, what are some of the, non-scale, we'll say, because women always look at the scale, which I feel like is okay, in context of other things, but it can be a little bit of a, psychological torture chamber,
Listen,
that little square of the bathroom.
Listen, 9 out of 10, 90% of the people watching this right now, or 9 out of 10 of the clients that I train, did better when I told them to take their scale and throw it away. I hate the scale. And it's not because the scale itself is bad. It's, first of all, it's a general measurement of total mass. So if you cut your leg off, you lost weight, I guess, congratulations. But because
I'm finally 110.
Yeah, I know.
I don't have a leg anymore.
Yeah,
right?
You know what happens with it? This is what I hate about the scale. I would get clients that would come in and we'd be talking and they'd be like, oh my God, I feel so good. Like, I'm feeling so great and I feel strong. And, my coworkers are asking me like how I've lost so much weight. My husband thinks I lost 10 pounds. Everything's amazing. And then we would go do their measurements and they'd step on the scale and it went down 1 pound or it didn't go down at all. And all of a sudden, everything sucks. Everything's terrible. Nothing's working, even though all the other stuff that they were just, and I'd have to explain lean body mass versus fat mass and this and that. Or here's the worst part. I would get people who would be like, oh my God, my program is going great. I lost 15 pounds, but my hair is starting to fall out. I can't sleep well. My libido's in the dump. I have low energy, but hey, I lost 15 pounds. I must be doing great. We've attached so much to the scale that we ignore everything else. And it all becomes about the scale. So take the scale, throw it out. I think tracking can be valuable in general, but it's so triggering for people that I like to trick them into doing the right things without having to track. So let's start here. For the first couple years of strength training, getting stronger is the best thing you can see in the gym. If you're getting stronger, you're probably doing most things right. Probably. You're probably getting adequate sleep. You're probably feeding yourself appropriately, and your strength training routine is probably appropriate. If you see yourself relatively consistently over the course of, months, wow, I'm lifting more weight, I'm doing more reps, I'm stronger. For the first couple of years, that's the metric you want to look at. If you're not getting stronger, then something is off. With diet, this is a psychological thing, but it works. It's like magic. I don't tell people to cut calories or whatever. You know what I do? I tell them, we're going to take your target body weight. Let's say your target body weight is 130 pounds. And we're going to hit 130 grams of protein a day. And we're going to eat it from whole natural foods. And we're going to eat it first in every meal. And then they'd come back to me and they'd be like, I'm stuffed. I'm eating so much food. How the hell am I losing weight? I'm losing weight. What's going on? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. Eating that much protein makes you eat less calories. So without realizing it, you've cut your calories. But it works way better because it doesn't feel like I'm restricting myself. And so there's a lot of things I would do as a trainer that I found to be far more successful than cut your calories, measure this, weigh that, type of deal. Not that I'm against tracking, but for a lot of people that tends to make things worse, tends to make diet stressful, which just doesn't help. So I tend to advise things that get the results that we want, that feel good versus, here just, it's like we're not machines, you know what I mean? I can't just input directions and then have you follow the direction. It doesn't work that way. I have to feel like I'm enjoying this. I have to feel like I have to be able to see that it's working, which sometimes means I have to broaden my scope. Like if I'm only looking at the mirror and the scale, I don't have a wide enough scope to see if this is actually working because I'm ignoring all these other things that I might be just not noticing because I'm not paying attention. Like, oh my God, I feel good. Well, I'm drinking less coffee. Why do I need less coffee? Or, you know what? My clothes are fitting a little bit differently, or I feel more mobile, or I'm playing with my kids on the floor. I never did that before, or whatever. So, you got to widen your scopes. You get a full picture. It's got to feel good. What makes something feel good? Well, if it's appropriate and if you're doing it because you care about yourself, not because you hate yourself. Nobody likes hating themselves all the time. So you got to get out of that mentality. And then you end up, this ends up becoming something you don't want to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And to your point around hating yourself, like what's the point in trying to live a long life? If you hate yourself, like what a miserable existence. I mean, at least that's where, my own personal development, my own personal story, as I'm sure many can relate to, we sort of grow up, there's many different scenarios that can lead to this where you're very self-conscious. You have a lot of self-doubt. There's shame, there's guilt, there's self-loathing. And there's literally, at least where I am in my life now in my mid 40s, I don't see a point in trying to optimize for health span and trying to optimize for longevity and trying to live a long life if you have such a poor relationship with yourself, right? If you can't stand who you are or what you've,
Totally.
Yes.
Look, you can hate yourself into changing things, into growing, but you'll rob yourself of the joy of feeling like you did it because you wanted to. So it's not the same thing. And it doesn't stick. I'm going to tell you this right now. You know what it looks like when you hate yourself to lose weight? You end up rebelling against yourself. You don't go off your diet a little bit. You go off your diet. You don't skip a couple days at the gym. You don't go back. And then when people ask you, you say things like, it's because I want to enjoy my life. So you stopped being healthy and fit to enjoy your life? Well, yeah, of course, if you hated yourself through the whole process. So it won't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You have to do it out of self-care. You have to feed yourself out of self-care. You have to exercise out of self-care. You have to do it through that lens. Not only will that direct you so that you do things in an appropriate way, meaning you're not going to overtrain. You're going to motivate yourself when it's appropriate. When it's not, you're not going to. It means you'll say no to foods that aren't good for you. And sometimes you'll say yes, because that's balance, because you're caring for yourself. When you do it because you hate yourself, eventually, and that's, by the way, you end up separating yourself. Psychologically, it's what happens. You become the child and you become the parent. You can't eat that. You must go to the gym. You're fat, whatever. Eventually, the child takes over, rebellion, and then you go off. So if you're doing this up and down, on and off, it's probably because you're hating yourself through the whole process.
Yeah. And I think, at least for me, I certainly got into weight training for aesthetics, as I'm sure many people did. But I think that the pride that I derive from it, the pride that I derive from lifting heavy weights and having really good form and really feeling the muscles work and feeling really accomplished after a session, I think in many ways, like I've saved thousands in therapy.
Because, you know what's funny? You actually said it earlier. I don't know if you realize this. Here's something, and I know you notice this as well because you've been in gyms for a while. One of the biggest differences between people who are consistent with exercise and nutrition, who've kind of found this nice rhythm with it, who've done it for a long time, the difference between them and everyone else, here's the biggest difference, and you just did it. As you get older, you find ways of telling people your age versus the other way where you find ways of I don't want to tell you how old I am. Like as I get older, I love telling people I'm 45 years old.
Yeah.
I love it because it's like, you separate yourself from your peers so much and you feel so good in your body and what you're doing. It's really interesting. Like when you meet fit older people, I don't care how old they are, 70, 80, doesn't matter. They'll tell you right out the gates, oh, I'm 75 this year. I've been working out for, like, they want to tell you how old they are because they're so proud of it. It's so different.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. I love that. And it's funny too, because now my children are tween and a teenager, and their friends are noticing. They're like, your mom doesn't look like my mom, like our mom, they have like their little words. Like I can't even understand what they're talking about half the time.
Yeah.
But one of the words they've said is, oh, she's a baddie. So if anyone who has teenagers who knows what they're, knows the little language that middle schoolers use, like that's what they're like, oh, she's a baddie. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm 46. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Sal, it's so good connecting with you. I love spending time with you. You are such a wealth of knowledge, such a great orator, such a great communicator. So tell people where they can find you. I know we mentioned Mind Pump a few times, but I know you're back on Instagram now. I think you've gotten out of Instagram jail, but tell people where they can find you.
So Mind Pump Media on Instagram. Mind Pump is the podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, anywhere you can find the podcast. My personal Instagram is Mind Pump Di Stefano. And yes, I've been kicked off Instagram a couple times. I tend to have a big mouth. But Mind Pump Media, if you want to follow the podcast and just, all the good fitness stuff. And again, anywhere you can find the podcast, you can find a podcast, you'll see us. That's the best way to get our information.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much again. This has been just a delight.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.